Welcome to another lesson by ChessEnigma. Here we are going to talk about the defective development and a couple of ideas for you to think about what happens if your opponent plays out the opening carelessly. For example, this very first example, White was very careless. White didn't fight for the center and instead decided to play something as slow as g3, e5, and bishop g2. I mean, again, there's possibly nothing really terribly wrong about this, but I think that a couple of principles, they still apply for many chess openings. And one of the most important one is you always have to fight for the center and fight for the space advantage. Why is this? Because if you control space, then it's much easier for you to get privileges for the upcoming part of the game. So here White is not fighting for the center, and well, if your opponent doesn't want it, you should take it. So Black plays f5. I think also d5 is a completely normal move. White is very careless again. e3, very passive. Knight f6, b3, you see, super slow. None of the White's pieces or pawns are crossing the third rank at the moment. So again, d5, grab as much space as you can. Pretty obvious idea from Black's perspective. Bishop b2, bishop d6. Now look at this, we have a wonderful position, beautiful pawn center, which is backed by the minor pieces. Why play d4? Of course, we don't want to take on d4 because this would create a hole on e5. Instead, we continue grabbing even more space. So we have this, again, strong pawn center. The pawn on e4 takes away the f3 square for the knight. Also, now the White's bishop on g2 is not standing that great. The White bishop on b2 is staring at his own pawn on d4 as well. So White play knight e2 here, castles, and it seems that White has done nothing terribly wrong because he's about to play something like a c4, a knight c3, and he's sort of doing all right. But Black has this space advantage, and this is really important, and a possibility to start a potential king's attack. So this game continues with knight e7, c4, c6. Of course, Black solidifies his control of the center. And after c5, bishop c7, Black already is much better. And why is this? Because look at this pawn structure. So we not only have space advantage, but also have good chances to start a direct assault at a king's set. I'm talking about ideas like queen e8, queen h5, or maybe ideas like g5, f4, and get to the king. If White plays f4, we can take on f3, creating a very nice outpost on e4, and the pawn on e3 makes it a very easy target. Black eventually won the game. Now let's move on to the next example. Let's start from the very beginning. So here, this is the game of Bogomil Andonov playing against the famous Armenian grandmaster Zbat Luputyan. The theme of this game is that you should never block your own pieces in the opening. And here, the experience of the Armenian grandmaster very nicely exploited this. So after knight f3, d5, c4, which is one way to fight for the center. Black decided to accept it. D takes on c4, check, bishop d7, slightly unusual move. Normally, Black plays knight e7 and after a6, b5 brings out the bishop on b7. But okay, it still looks rather interesting. Queen c4, e6. Of course, White is grabbing the center with d4. So again, it's very important who is controlling the center. White seemingly is doing everything correctly. Luputyan played b5, rather unusual move. But the idea is to continue with knight a6 and very quickly play c5 and rook c8. Now White started to be a bit slow. So he played first a3, I guess taking care of the b4 square, c5, d takes on c5, knight c5, and bishop e3. Look at this. So White blocks the development of his bishop on f1. And this could have some consequences, and it did. After rook c8, White played knight e2, knight f6, and since the bishop on f1 is not developed, White decided it's a good idea to bring the bishop on g2 and castle short. Black felt that there's a very nice possibility to create a deadly trap and play queen c7, which seemingly is a normal developing move because white is thinking black just developed the knight on c5 and wants to play bishop e7 and short castle. And here white made the terrible blunder, which, by the way, is the same story if white plays bishop g2. White plays bishop d4. And it's not obvious why this is a mistake. Now, instead, he could have played knight b3 and get in slightly worse position, I guess, because black is having very nice development here. Now, instead, white played this bishop d4 with the idea to, I don't know, e4, e5, or maybe position the bishop on c3, bishop e5 ideas. There's a very cute refutation of this mistake, which is knight e3 check. That's it. So queen e3, the idea is queen c1, a very basic checkmate on the first rank. Rook c1, that's a mate on the board. And if white doesn't take with the queen on d3, the queen on c2 is lost. So Antonov here simply had to resign the game. Now, the next game will be a game between Stefano Tatai against Viktor Korchnoi. Here, white was again playing a bit careless and not too much thinking about his upcoming moves. So e4, e6, the French defense, takes, bishop d3. And of course, one of the greatest chess players, Viktor Korchnoi, who is often regarded as possibly the strongest player never to become a world champion. He was very, very close to become a world champion. He understood, of course, the importance of the space advantage. So that's why for Korchnoi, this is a very easy move. c5, fight for the space advantage. If it creates an isolated pawn on d5, no problem, as long as his pieces are active. White played knight f3, knight c6, and now look at this. Now, the first mistake from white, when he shows the signs of a defective development, he's not really thinking further too much, and he sees, oh, I can give you a check here on e2 and collect the pawn on c5. Because it seems that after bishop e7, d takes on c5, white keeps the extra pawn, and after bishop e6, well, there might be ideas like knight g5. Well, Korchnoi doesn't really care about a pawn on c5. Of course, he played bishop e7, d takes on c5, knight f6. And now white starts to think, okay, I have some issues, right? Because bishop g4 and knight e4 suddenly is a problem. So again, he's not really thinking about the future, how his position is going to look like in a couple of moves. He played h3 to deal with one problem, which is bishop g4. Korchnoi very quickly played short castle, now white castle, and bishop c5. Now black is getting very active, rook e8 is coming with a tempi, and yeah, white is looking at this position and wondering, what did I do wrong? I mean, queen e2 check was such a tempting move, wasn't it? So since the knight e4 or knight b4 also might be a threat, he decided he has time to play c3. Now look how quickly Korchnoi takes over the game. He played rook e8, queen c2. And instead of worrying about the bishop on c8 where to position it, there's no need to play something like bishop e6 and say, check, mark, I have completed my development. Korchnoi immediately senses he can start an attack. He played queen d6. The idea is to play queen g3, or maybe bishop h3 with queen g3 to follow. You see, f takes on g3 is not a possibility because the white king, is under a pin. White tried to develop his pieces with knight e2, and basically just needs a couple of moves, which is knight b3, knight e4, and he is fine. But it doesn't work like that in chess. I mean, chess is a very fast-driven game. Unfortunately, immediately used the opportunity to play queen g3. You're gonna play king h1, bishop f2, simply black collects an extra pawn and the attack is ongoing. White play bishop f5, and now his idea is that after the bishop trade, he's gonna play something like, I don't know, king h1 or maybe knight b3, and he's fine. Now with the bishop f5 move, white no longer guard e2 square. And of course, Korchnoi immediately used this. He played rook e2 to attack the pawn on f2 as well. White play knight e4, and after knight takes on d4, there's no f takes on g3, knight takes on c2, black is simply winning. And after c takes on d4, bishop d4, black's attack is decisive. Korchnoi won the game. Now, let's move on to the next example. Alexander Onischuk was playing with white against Alexander Kovacevic. So this game is going to showcase you what happens if your opponent plays unnecessary moves, which essentially means loses valuable time. What you should do about it. So it was c4, e5, knight c3, knight c6. Looks pretty normal at the moment. Knight f3. And black decided to play g6, which is a completely normal move because he wants to play bishop g7, knight f6, castles, maybe d6 or d5. Makes perfect sense. And Onischuk senses, wait, I have an opportunity here. So how about I play d4 immediately? After d4, since white is threatening to play d5 to attack the knight on c6, it seems that black is pretty happy to take on d4 with a pawn. Because now, after knight e4, bishop g7, black is just continuing a good development. Onischuk decided to play a gambit. He played knight e5, and suddenly there are some problems. Because how do you get rid of this knight? There might be bishop f4, there might be bishop g5. If black plays knight e7 to get rid of the knight, there's knight f6, mate in 1. If black plays knight f6, there's bishop g5 pin. So black decided, okay, I probably have time for that. So I'm going to play h6. Just to deal with a bishop g5 threat, I'm going to play bishop g7, knight f6 or knight a7 and complete development. It doesn't work like that. Because now, why play knight x on d4? And now the big threat is knight b5. It's not really clear if black can afford to waste even more tempi, like a6, because there could be knight c6 and queen d4, and suddenly this rook on h8 is under attack. So you can't just waste time early on with moves like h6 and a6 and expect to have a good game with black. So black decided to play bishop g7. Of course, while playing knight b5, the pawn on c7 is under attack. So it's not very clear how to defend it. Black decided, okay, I'm going to play kind of a gambit, king f8. Knight c7, rook b8, knight b5, white retreats with the knight. And another useless move by black, a6, knight c3, knight f6. And it seems that black is about to get the normal development, but bishop f4 and black's position is just terrible. There's no d6. After d6, knight f6, white simply collects a pawn on d6. 2 extra pawns should be enough to win the game. Black played here, and after bishop c7, white just won the game. Because there's all kinds of threats like bishop d6, knight c7, and black is simply losing even more material. A terrible game by black. The next game is quite surprising because it features one of the greatest players in the history of chess, Garry Kasparov with black. He was playing against Shahryar Mamedyarov. This is the game which very nicely showcases that you can very easily mix up openings, especially when there's a gambit. And Kasparov did mix it up. So he did not anticipate his opponent's plan. This is going to be the story of this game. After d4, d5, queen's gambit accepted, d6 on c4. Mamedyarov played e3, so he wants to accelerate his development by playing bishop c4 and then somehow utilize the power of his pawn center. Kasparov played e5, which is one of the most played moves here in this position. The idea is to meet d6 on e5 with queen d1, knight c6, a very quick development followed by a long castle. Exactly how Kasparov likes to play chess. Of course, Mamedyarov would never trade his leading development for something like that. He played knight f3, instead continuing his development. E takes on d4, bishop takes on c4 is a pretty known gambit. Now the trick here is that after d takes on e3, you have to be careful about bishop takes on f7 check. King f7, you see the queen on d8 is under attack. So how do you continue? And I think here Kasparov simply mixed up something because the most played move here is bishop b4 check, and you have to be quite careful what happens with his pawn on f7. Instead, he played knight f6 immediately, not paying enough attention to the ideas of the position. And after queen b3, suddenly there are massive problems to defend the pawn on f7. So this battery of the queen and the bishop suddenly is quite difficult for black to deal with. So Kasparov played queen e7 to protect the pawn, and of course Mamedyarov accelerated his development by playing short castle. As you see, he's not rushing to grab the pawn on d4, and his idea now is possibly to play e takes on d4 and rook e1, exploiting the fact that the black queen stands on e7. One mistake and black is in a deep trouble. And finally, one more game, which is a very, very famous game, because here in this game, the former world champion Anatoly Karpov lost a game in just 12 moves by famously blundering a piece. So I think that whenever you are playing in the opening, you should always make sure that your pieces are well coordinating together. And even such a legendary player as Karpov sometimes is not immune to making such mistakes. So it's a very famous example. White player is Larry Christensen, a strong grandmaster from United States. Knight f3, the Petrosian variation, bishop a6, queen c2. Okay, it doesn't really matter this opening phase. The idea is to provoke the white queen to go to c2 so that black can play c5. And then the queen on d1 no longer supports the d5 push. Also, it's quite important to understand this was the time when Polo Gajewski's pawn sacrifice d4, d5 was quite famous, and it was being explored in many versions of the Queen's Indian defense. So Christensen played knight c3, Karpov played c5. Now you see this d5 supposedly no longer works as great because the white queen is not on d1. Now Christensen played e4, which is pretty normal move, gaining space, willing to finish development. C takes, knight e4, knight c6. So we have some sort of Sicilian Kant amount of like position, and black is trying to have some dynamics using these dark squares. Christensen took on c6, bishop takes on c6. Karpov is seeking for some dynamics. Bishop e4 makes sense. Again, thinking about ideas like rook d1, fighting for those dark squares, not allowing black to put the bishop on d6, which is one of the key ideas. Now look at this. Something amazing happened here. So Karpov obviously wants to position his bishop on d6, but it's impossible because the white bishop here stands on f4. So what he does, he plays knight h5. And it does look pretty logical because if white plays bishop g3, then black is simply eliminating this dark swept bishop and possibly positioning the bishop on d6 and e5. Maybe even bishop c5 makes sense. So Christensen plays bishop e3. And now Karpov carries out his idea. He plays bishop d6. He wants to play ideas like knight f4, maybe queen f6, and have a very nice control of the dark squares. There's one problem though. His pieces are discoordinated. As you see, the bishop on d6 and knight on h5, they don't really have a proper support. Well, there came the big surprise. Christensen played queen d1, and suddenly Karpov realized that he's simply dropping a piece. There's no way he can defend the knight on h5 and the bishop on d6 with his queen. So he simply had to resign. I hope that these examples showcase you the importance of having a good development in the opening phase, and you're not going to be on the other side by making useless moves. You'll always anticipate your opponent's plan and bring the king to the safety while having a good, harmonious coordination between all of your pieces.
Access ChessEnigma's free sample lessons. Enjoy videos, interactive exercises, and a digital board to practice anywhere on any device. Sign up for free and start improving your chess from home today.